Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of East Cambs District Council Planning Committee, and I hope you'll find the proceedings interesting. Item 1 on the agenda is Caroline will do the safety warnings or alerts.
Thank you, Chairman. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the fire alarm sounds, please can you leave by the nearest available exit, which is the door you came in through, or there's a fire exit at the back here, and congregate by the barrier in the front car park. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor Liz Every, Councillor Gareth Wilson and Councillor Matthew Downey, and we have Councillor Julia Happer here as a substitute for Councillor Every.
Thank you very much indeed. Declarations of interest. Do we have any members? Yes, Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to declare an interest in item number 4, as I'm a trustee of East Cambs CLT, which is a development that is on Simeon Close, which is just beside the development that we're looking at. However, I have an open mind, so I still plan to speak and vote.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We move now to item number 3. Members will find we have a rather busy October and November, and so for members' convenience, there's a list of the meetings that you're involved with and the times, and therefore I'd hope you would take these home, treasure them, and keep them, because we do want to have a full turnout at the various meetings we're involved with. We do have a new head of planning start on the end of October, and that's Simon Ellis. He's starting on the 31st of October, and above him in the chain is a new director, and that's Isabel Edgar, and she's starting on the 5th of November. At the moment, I'd like to congratulate and thank those senior members of the planning department who are filling in admirably, and things seem to be ticking over pretty well, and in fact very well, but nevertheless things can only get even better when we get new senior management. I think we've now gone through my comments, so we'll move on to item number 4, and if we could have the officer presentation, please.
Good afternoon, members. Can everybody hear me? Members of the public, can you hear me? Lovely. Okay, agenda item number 4 is the Heaton Drive and land to the west of Heaton Close, Kilkenny Avenue, or the former MOD application site. The proposal is the erection of 27 dwellings to include parking for existing dwellings and landscaping. So the application site you can see here is outlined in red. It's quite pale, actually. You've all been given a colour photocopy of this plan. If anyone hasn't got a copy, I've got some here. We've all got them? Okay, then. The site is approximately 88 hectares. That's 21 acres in old money. The existing dwellings on the site are 88, and they were used originally by the RAF and in the 90s by the United States Air Force. It was deemed surplus to requirements in 2011 and returned to the MOD in September 2012. The accommodation has remained unoccupied until 2018, when the site was disposed of. As you see to the west of the site, you've got the hospital buildings, and the north and the east. You can't see it so well in this the slide, but it's planned urban housing station for the North Ely development, and south of the red line is existing housing. So here we go. It's easier now to see the outline of the agricultural fields yet. So there's been no development starting yet adjacent to this site boundary to the north or the east yet. So it's still virgin agricultural land. But you can see that it's beautifully tree lined. A lot of them are protected. However, the application won't affect any protected trees. As you can see in the centre, it benefits from a very large area of public open space, which is fringed by mature trees. And I've said as many of which are protected. So the proposal, here we go. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. So you have to keep your eye on the green blocks indicate the new apartment blocks. And you can see there's a couple indicated to the north of the site and along the eastern boundary of, just east of the central open space. The salmon blocks indicate the 2-storey dwellings. Yeah, they're just down to the, can you see them there? They are just, oh, here we go. Yeah, they're just here. There's some semi-detached dwellings here. That's the salmon blocks there. As you see, again, the green blocks there, the 2-storey flats. So there's four flats apiece, again here, along here. And you can just see another block there. In the pale blue or lilac, that is the chalet bungalow. So it's kind of a single story with accommodation in the loft space. And here we have, here we go. Here's the maisonettes, just as you come in through to Kilkenny Avenue. So here is the old social club, which is going to form the multi-storey car park for the hospital site. The other areas here, they're all parking for the existing dwellings there, the 88 existing dwellings. Okay, so due to the views expressed within the letters of representation, the scheme has been significantly reduced from 53 to 27. Both market and affordable housing are on the site, 33% of which is above the level required by policy. And that means there's 9 affordable dwellings in total, 6 1-bedrooms and 2-bedroom flats with and their affordable rent with 3 units of low-cost ownership. And they would be a 1-bedroom flat, a 1 2-bedroom flat and a 1 3-bed house. I'd like to point out at this stage that the affordable housing referred to here is to deliver the policy requirement. It is acknowledged that the applicant has a separate commitment to increase affordable housing provision. However, this is secured outside of the planning process, so it doesn't get involved with this application as it is. However, this does provide in excess of policy requirement. All houses and ground floor apartments would be M42 compliant, and all dwellings would comply with the government space standards. Central area of open space remains undeveloped, with the new housing proposed adjacent to the northern and eastern boundaries, and they constitute infill development. Okay, so here's the site and surrounding area. I don't know if you can see, but there's, okay, so number 1 up here, okay, refers to that screen there and so on. So this just shows you exactly the type, design and materials of the existing housing on the site. I'm not going to go into any greater detail, but unless you want me to, I'll give you a few minutes to absorb that. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the material planning considerations are the principle of development, residential amenity, visual amenity, highways, parking and connectivity, ecology, biodiversity and trees. Oh yeah, and trees again, infrastructure and other matters. So the principle of development, again, it's proposed from 53 to 27 now. Due to public opinion and taking on board all the letters of representation against this, it's been reduced to 27. It's located within development envelope of Ely. It has no detrimental impact on visual or residential amenity, and there are no highway objections. The scheme is policy compliant and no objection is therefore in principle to the scheme. So just to take you through in snapshot form, the residential amenity, again, on the left-hand side is the maisonettes that are opposite the multi-storey or the proposed multi-storey car park as you're coming straight into Kilkenny Avenue on the left-hand side as you come in. Okay, and then I'm just taking you as just a snapshot of the layout of the apartment blocks. So they would be 2 on the ground floor, 2 on the first floor, and they would be along the eastern and northern boundaries of the site. And that's the central one. So top right, you've got the semi-detached blocks, and you can see the relationship with the existing dwellings, which are all kind of greyed out. So, but it gives you a kind of reference to how it impacts or doesn't necessarily impact on the residential amenity of existing occupiers. So again, the bottom right-hand side is the bungalow. And all development provides an acceptable residential access to light and open space, private open space within each dwelling. It will they comply with the council's design criteria. Okay, so here we go. These are views of the central public open space, and as you can see, it's being retained in perpetuity. Okay, so now we've got the location of the new development along the boundary. So you're looking at now the design of the houses now. So you've got, these are the flats, and now looking along the northern boundary, this is where they would be located on site. And again, this is the Kilkenny Avenue 1, the bungalows. So the existing property there is on the right-hand side. And then the location of the development adjacent to the Merrifield Gardens. So you can see in the bottom screen is the street scene proposed, how it would look, and then the pictures indicate the existing situation. And this is the design of the new chalet bungalow and its location adjacent to Keaton Drive. So highways, access and highway safety. The existing access and junctions have been assessed by the local planning authority, by the local highways authority, and no concerns have been identified. And therefore no modifications are proposed to the existing junctions or highway network. Parking, as mentioned before, the proposed parking is for the existing 171, and the parking provision for the proposed dwellings would be 60. Further details would be required on an electric car charging strategy and cycle storage facilities. Connectivity. Okay, so this slide indicates the existing site outlined in red and the proposed North Ely extension, and you'll see that's to the north of the site, and it wraps around to the east. So within the site, the applicant has drawn up by means of a yellow line possible routes through to other areas, which are highlighted in yellow. So she'll take my little red dot. Okay, so here there is a proposed access through to the North Ely development. However, it's not there at the moment, and therefore the applicant will be required by condition to provide details of the opening this side of the red line, so that in future, when that is opened up, there will be access, a non-motorized access through to that site. Coming now down, so again here you can cycle, you can walk, you can drive down to here, which is Heaton Drive. Can you hear me while I turn around? Sorry. Yeah, Heaton Drive here. So again, there is by the water tower, just below the water tower here, there is an opening, there is a pedestrian access through there now, which is open all the time. There is a gated entrance to allow vehicular entrance, but that's permanently closed for obvious reasons, because you don't want it to sort of be used by unauthorized people. Yeah, so it just highlights possible links through the site in the future. Again, down to the bottom left-hand side, there's an existing through route which takes you past the existing public open space just below the Princess of Wales Hospital. The site is served by a range of sustainable modes of transport, and therefore it's in a sustainable location. So ecology. The proposal shows no net loss of biodiversity, although no significant gain, and as such, contribution towards the Ely North Country Park would be sought by the Section 106 agreement. In terms of trees, a total of 23 trees would be removed, and these are shown as circled in red. Most of them are along the northern boundary, and the tree officer has kind of suggested that he'd like all of them removed, but not all of them are going to be removed because they have suffered structural failures, and they should all be replaced with trees of more suitable long-term retention. There are some where the proposed semi-detached properties, you can just see them here, but they're not protected, and they are low quality as well, so they're going to be removed to be replaced. In terms of infrastructure, the scheme would make a financial contribution towards securing provision of nearby or upgrading, extending existing provision of open space, and the scheme would make a financial contribution towards early years places at the North Ely Primary School. Other matters, in terms of archaeology, drainage, sustainability, information has been provided to the satisfaction of the technical consultees, and further information can be provided by condition if required. So in the planning balance, the proposal demonstrates an appropriate mix of accommodation types and would provide an acceptable standard of living for future occupiers. The size and location of development would not compromise the living environment of existing residents. In terms of the impact on visual amenity, the scheme would sit comfortably within its surroundings and would not impact on the character of the area. And there are no highway implications. So the recommendation today is the proposal would comply with the policy aspirations of Policy Growth 2, where limited infilling is considered acceptable, and policies HO1, HO2, ENV1, ENV2, ENV7, 8, COM7 and COM8 of the East Cambridgeshire Local Plan, as well as national policy, and is considered to represent sustainable development. The proposal is therefore recommended for approval, subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. We have Mr. John Powell to speak on behalf of Ely Cycling Campaign. You've got 5 minutes, Mr. Powell, and the amber light will come on at 4.
So my name's John Powell. I represent Ely Cycling Campaign. It's an organisation which was set up in, I think it was 2013, largely prompted by difficulties of access of residents to the railway station, but our interests are cycling, obviously within the Ely area. We've got we have 27 members who are currently active, and there's about 50 other people who don't really contribute to the day-to-day discussions that we have, but are members. So there's 2 points that I want to make for this. I'll mention the first one, which is quick and straightforward. The second item is a little bit more complicated. So in the applicant's 5th of April email, into which the planning officer was copied in, the applicant stated that there will be a foot cycle linkage at the north end of Nigel Road, which the officer had mentioned today, when the High Flyer Phase 2 is built. However, the applicant's plans show only a footway. We suggest that a cycleway be included and added as part of the planning condition. So that's straightforward. The second part is more convoluted, unfortunately. The briefing document asserts that suitable measures to provide sustainable travel have been submitted in the travel plan. We disagree. We've pointed out in our objection, which is on file, the deficiencies in the proposal, which is largely around access to and from the site along Lynn Road. I'm sure that members here will be aware that Hopkins Homes, who are responsible for building a large part of the cycleway that would connect this route that is proposed within the travel plan for this application, has recently requested that they back out of their obligation to build the cycleway built on difficulties that we'd already pointed out. The briefing document also mentions at section 7512, an alternative route, which again, the officers mentioned today, along a private road between Highflyer Cottages and Kings Avenue. I've confirmed with Cambridgeshire Highways, along with the definitive map and ordnance survey maps, that this is not a bridle way as is stated in the briefing document. Therefore, if this is to be used and claimed as being accessible both to pedestrians and to cyclists, then the status of this route needs to be clarified. On top of that, the rest of the route from south of Kings Avenue to the centre of Ely and obviously on to places like the railway station will need to be built as well. So cycling access between the development and the key destinations is very important. And the statement in the briefing note about COM7 is partially incomplete and doesn't stress that sustainable travel really does need to be prioritised. Now, East Cambridgeshire District Council has commissioned an assessment by Sustrans that includes in its Little Downham routes an option that would allow cycling along the southern section of Lynn Road, which is the section that the developer on the other side of Lynn Road, Hopkins Homes, is unable to provide. We suggest, given that the proposal that Sustrans has in its Little Downham options, we suggest that the applicant today make a section 102 contribution to some kind of usable cycle route so that people who move into the houses in this current application are able to cycle into the middle of Ely and to other key destinations such as schools and to the railway station. Finished.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Powell? Mr. Trapp.
Councillor Trapp. Thank you very much, Mr. Powell. There seems to be some variance between what we've shown there as a cycle route, and I'm not quite clear about what the cycle routes you are talking about, but it seemed that there was some kind of route to the south. Is it to the side of Lynn Road or not?
Currently, there's, again, all this is in our June 2021 objection to the this route as being usable for cyclists. So the northern section of Lynn Road, cyclists are sharing the footpath, because that's what it is. It is a footpath with signs saying cyclists can use it along that section as far as the roundabout for with Cam Drive. The roundabout with Cam Drive is a problem. If cyclists take the road instead of being in conflict with pedestrians along that northern section of Lynn Road between the Princess of Wales and Cam Drive, then the islands that are on that section of Lynn Road present a real hazard because cars squeeze past cyclists on that stretch if they take the road. So that northern section is completely inadequate. It's nowhere near the standards that are required by modern day requirements such as LTM 120. Then further to the south, partway beyond Cam Drive, again, there's lots of drives as well, I forgot to mention. There are lots of drives across the footpath on the northern section of Lynn Road. It's just too dangerous. These junctions are the biggest problem for cyclists because people reverse out of their drives and hit pedestrians and cyclists. So again, that's another point which we've made in our objection. To the south, the Lynn Road gets narrow. There's lots of parking and the speed at which traffic goes is fast. We couldn't envisage a way that a cycle route could be put in there in isolation. And it looks from the comments that the highways have had on the Hopkins application to build a cycleway, that they also agree that that they can't see a way how a cycle route can be built on that southern section down to Egremont Street from partway up Lynn Road.
Thank you. Could I ask you a further question? Because there's a proposal for the high flyer, I think it's a high flyer one, am I right? Yeah, north of that site. Any cycle path from this development would also benefit those from the high flyer site. Would that be right?
Certainly the key thing for the high flyer development that's mentioned today is that access on Nigel Road that will give people who in this future development to the north and east of the development we're considering today, that access will give access in particular to the Princess of Wales. And if we ever get proper cycling and walking access along Lynn Road, then it would apply that we'd be able to access the railway station in the centre of Ely and also schools.
Okay, so in fact, what you're proposing, suggesting, would benefit not only that development, but future developments as well.
Absolutely. It's the whole of North Ely. Now, this development isn't within the supplementary planning document, it's just on the edge. But the principles that have been expounded within the supplementary planning document of 2014 for North Ely really do apply to this development. So the principles, I've got the principles listed here somewhere.
This is a question and answer session, which are question from members. Have you any more questions, Councillor Trapp?
No, I'm just going to say thank you very much for your.
Okay, thank you.
Any members? Anyone else? Yes.
If I may, Chair. Just a clarification. If I was understanding, you said Hopkins Homes couldn't envisage a way of actually putting that in, or was it couldn't afford it? Because you're looking for contributions to, as I understood it, for a section from section 6 to help with putting in a cycleway.
Hopkins Homes has a planning condition to build the cycleway from their development all the way down to Egremont Street. They've put in a subsequent application for that to be partially abrogated, the southern section. But of course, if you stop a cycle route at one point, it is just like cycling to Witchford from Ely. If you block one point, you can't use the cycleway. So it's pointless building the cycleway if you don't have a full cycle route.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Indeed, Mr. Powell. And we now have Andy Moffat on behalf of the agent. And Mr. Moffat, I'm sure you know it's 5 minutes and the amber light will come on at 4 and start at your convenience.
Good afternoon, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. I certainly won't take up the 5 minutes, but I think there's a few key points it's probably worth re-emphasising. I think it's been made clear to you this afternoon, the application before you today is for 27 dwellings. The proposals have been amended in response to comments received as part of the pre-application inquiry and the public exhibition carried out in early 2020. Before the applications were submitted, and then it's been further amended in response to comments received during the consideration of the application. At each point, the applicant has sought to respond positively to comments received and provide further information as requested by consultees. We're pleased to note that the City of Ely Council now has no concerns with regards to this application. And in terms of the conclusions reached by the officer, I won't go through them all or repeat them in detail. You've got them all in front of you, but again, a few pertinent bullet points from your own officer's report. The site is located within the development envelope of Ely, which is defined by policy as a growth area. The central area of open space will remain wholly undeveloped. There's also now going to be a woodland walk through the western side of that to provide an additional connectivity. The proposal demonstrates an appropriate mix of accommodation types and provide an acceptable standard of living for existing residents and future occupiers. The scheme would fit comfortably into its surroundings, would not impact on the character of the area, and there are no highway implications. I think as you heard listed earlier by the case officer, the application complies with the aspirations and the wording of the key local plan proposals. The application is therefore recommended for approval by your officers subject to conditions and the completion of Section 106 legal agreement, and we would invite you to follow that clear recommendation. Just perhaps a couple of points it's worth emphasising in relation to Mr. Powell and the Ely cycling campaign. The link to the northwest, in fact, there's a condition which requires the details of that to be agreed. So the finer details of that will be looked at. Certainly to date, it's been shown as a footway rather than a cycleway because it links through to Nigel Road. Nigel Road doesn't have any cycleway connectivity. It itself has the various crossovers of accesses. So again, I think the emphasis today, to date, has been on a pedestrian connectivity through to there. And again, I think we've heard about the wider issues within Ely, but obviously what we're looking at is an application here for 27 dwellings, and it's really about making sure that this development can be made acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for the applicant? No? Thank you very much indeed. We now have a speaker, Councillor Harris, who is, I believe, the ward member for this part of Ely. I'm sure you're familiar, Councillor Harris, with the rules. Please start when it's convenient for you.
First thing I should say is that I'm really here on behalf of Councillor Alison Whelan, who's been very closely involved in this entire process. She's unable to be here due to ill health, going into hospital for an operation next week. So I'm going to try to represent our collective view on the development. And first of all, I do want to pay tribute to the applicants and the officers for listening to the concerns of residents. As everybody will know, a very large number of people did in fact write in, an unusually large number. But given the fact that this place in North Ely has a very special significance to the people living in the area, I suppose that's not surprising. But I really do want to give credit to the people who have simplified the application, reduced the number of housing units, and also increased the affordable housing. We are extremely pleased to see not only a full third of the units being affordable, but also 6 of them being for affordable rent, which is something that personally I believe this area needs more of, and I'm glad to see it. There are a couple of areas where I think there is still cause for concern. There are a number of outstanding objections from residents that do need to be taken seriously. But as the officer and the applicant have made clear, this is in the growth area. It does fit in with the development plan. All of us who've been watching this develop over the past 3 years and know the backstory understand that thanks to the MOD's requirements, development here is inevitable. And our job is to make sure that it's the best possible outcome for the city and for the residents. So the couple of points that I would like to leave with you and suggest that you build into the considerations. First, with regard to the open space, which is the most loved feature of this area, tremendously important amenity for everybody. I would strongly recommend that this be designated a village green, which is something that could be done very easily. It is an absolute win-win for everybody. It means that residents would have the assurance that this is inviolable going forward and that there is no future threat on this area. And I see no reason why the developers should object or the council itself should object. The second point, which has been ably covered by Mr. Powell, relates to the transport access of every kind. Now, as some of you will know, I am on the bus and active travel working committee. So I've had so I've had the ability to look into the development of cycleway proposals and to be engaged in the ongoing process of consultation. I have also personally objected to Hopkins Homes' desire to, what I can only say is renege on their commitments regarding the cycleway into the centre of Ely. They do not consider that to be a closed matter and are still waiting an update on that. There are clearly issues when the alternative cycleway goes down Highflyer Avenue, which is a private road. So a consideration before that can be included in the plan is that we must have assurance from the owners, the church commissioners, I believe, that access will not be interrupted, is free and open, and any conditions there are. The cycle route down Lynn Road is a cause for real concern. It is not compliant with the current standard at the moment. It needs to be brought up to the right level before it can be considered effective. And finally, I would urge officers to look at the model being used for vehicular access. With the proposed development in the hospital and the growth in housing opposite, I am skeptical that there will really be no issues with road access. Not necessarily an effect of this specific development. It's a general issue in the area. And I think this needs to be looked into further. That's me done.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Members, any questions? Yes, please, David.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Just on your first point about Village Green designation, do you know if that's been raised with the City of Ely Council and whether they've taken a view on it? I'm sorry,
the Village Green designation. I don't know. My assumption is that given that Alison Whelan is a councillor on the City of Ely Council, she has either raised it or will shortly raise it.
Thanks, I just wondered.
Councillor Austin, is there something?
Well, thank you for that. I will take that.
Okay, I think we were sort of in the middle of Councillor Harris there. I'll come back to you and give you another opportunity to talk to him when Councillor Harris is finished.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to acknowledge what Councillor Austin said and said I will take this away and find out more about this and feed it back.
So, Councillor Austin, are you happy or do you want to expand on that? You don't? Okay. Councillor Trapp.
Thank you. It seems to me the main stumbling block to this application is the cycle path, and what Hopkins Homes cycle path was part of their planning, or the part of the condition, would be serving quite a number of other developments. Is this correct?
I think this whole issue of active travel in the entire district is now taking a higher and higher profile in our discussions. And we would certainly strongly recommend, I mean, we have been mandated by the Finance and Assets Committee to look into these issues. And we certainly recommend that active travel routes, including cycle routes, should be treated as seriously as possible, which is why we have a number of studies going on right now, which will end up as proposals properly costed that can be considered by the full council, as is right and proper. Now, your suggestion that this is the main stumbling block, that is above my pay grade. I mean, the officers would have to comment on that. I would be surprised if it would be described by them as the main stumbling block. I think that it is an issue, however, because for all of these new developments, access both by road, by walking, by safe cycling is a very major issue. I suggest this will probably be a topic for detailed negotiation with the developers. As for the process to be followed, I am really not certain of that, but I would certainly be glad of clarification.
just a comment, on the East Cams website now is the Sustrans report on the Littleport to Ely potential cycle routes. Two routes were suggested. There seem to be significant problems with either. One of them was via Chettisham, which would of course help that. And I think that that was suggested that that was the more unlikely route. So you may want to look at that to help your thought process.
Just to respond to that, yes, I am aware of these two routes suggested by Sustrans. In my simplicity, I assume since there's a direct road all the way to Littleport, why don't we put the cycle path next to that? And was told, well, it's not as easy as you think. Clearly, having the route from Littleport into the centre of Ely may well prove to be a benefit to this particular requirement. And I think that the suggestion one might make to officers and developers is, given the fact that it's going to cost the taxpayer a good deal of money to build these cycleways, if developers through the S106 process will make a contribution to that, it would be well received, I think.
I think the general conversation about this, we are here this afternoon discussing an application on the, what I call the old RAF site, and the benefits or disbenefits of any cycle route that go as far as Littleport have really got no relevance here. Officer, could you please now make any comments you'd like to make?
Okay, let's backtrack a little bit.
I beg your pardon, Councillor Harris, thank you.
Okay, so we've gone back to the connectivity because I think that's the main issues that the committee need clarification on. And as you can see again, the yellow line denotes, the possible routes through the MOD site. In point of fact, the condition, got it here, is number 22. And it stipulates that details in relation to the non-vehicular routes to the northwest of the site, which is this one here, need to be provided. And that would be prior to above ground construction. So that gives us early engagement with the applicant to provide, to seek a viable solution to providing. But however, it's difficult when the other side of the fence at the moment, there is no connectivity to that. So there has to be a certain amount of degree of negotiation with the developers, the other side. Otherwise, you just end up with a hole in the fence and it doesn't lead anywhere. So at the moment, all I can do is just prepare this side of the fence so that there is, you know, a will in the future to provide a link up through there for non-pedestrian and non-motorised vehicles. So that would include cycles and obviously pedestrians, but not cars. That's what we can do within the red line. Again, by the water tower. Here, down here. Yeah, this here is not a bridle way. I mean, it's not a bridle way. However, it's a right of access. It's not a public right of way. So members of the public still have access through there because there's a gap within the fence. So I don't know how we can, within the application we're considering, we can't foresee what is going to happen the other side of the fence again. However, we could increase the wording within condition 22 to provide details of, details of a non-motorised form of access through to the other site. So that was picking up on John Powell's sort of comments on the first one. The travel plan was submitted when the application was for 53 dwellings. We've got another condition there that they've got to revise the travel plan in light of the changes that have happened on the site. So there will be an opportunity to liaise with interested parties, i.e. the local highways authority, the public rights of way officer, to find out, to provide a suitable travel plan which can be submitted and agreed prior to commencement of what we put it down as. Prior to first occupation. That's the welcome travel packs, and there will be a travel plan that's been provided as well prior to occupation as well, so that we can sort all these issues out. With regard to the village green application, which is another issue that's been sort of brought up by Councillor Harris, is that I'm not aware of an application that's been submitted to protect that area of open space. It's not something that falls within the remit of the local planning authority to provide. So that would be up to the parish council or residents to put forward an application for consideration. I think that's covered.
Okay, we've got questions from Councillor Jones, first of all, I think.
Chair. Can I just have a bit of clarity? You made a distinction between right of access and right of way. Can you clarify what's the difference?
It's not a public right of way per se on all accounts. So that's what the public rights of way officer has told informed councillor Harris and John Powell. So through here, it's just members of the public have used that as a cut through to the other side of the, so it's a right of access, but it's not a designated public right of way. So I'm led to believe. But that doesn't mean to say that members of the public aren't using it.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
It's trying to get my head around having the right of access to go absolutely nowhere just seems if
Well,
you're not allowed to go the other side
it's
necessarily.
it's a historic route that people have used. But it's not actually been designated by the county as a public right of way. I think you get them all over the place really, where people just sort of use them historically, and then it's difficult to actually close them up. But I digress. So,
Councillor Huffer.
It's a sort of a question. If the application is approved, is it possible to condition play equipment for non-able-bodied children on the village green area? I didn't notice. I knew there was some play equipment, but I didn't know how extensive it was and whether there is access for non-able-bodied children.
there is because there is going to be now a contribution within the section 106 to either play equipment, so that can include play equipment for.
The application goes ahead. I would like that to be included as a condition, if that's
Okay.
possible.
Any other questions? Councillor Trapp.
Thank you. Sorry, coming back to this thorny question of cycles and things. It does seem to me from the stuff here that it is only 1.5 miles away from Ely Station. And I suspect a number of people will be using Ely Station. So going by cycle would be much more appropriate than going by car, because it could actually be quicker. But I also realize that within this scheme, we cannot say anything about the future and what other parts are. But at least in this scheme, we ought to be making sure that there's a cycle paths which could connect to the high flyer and to outside of it, such that later on, maybe the city of Ely or East Cambs develop real cycle paths, as in the cycling and bus and walking group. So I think the infrastructure here should be ready for connectivity to other possible developments, which we cannot actually enforce at the moment. Is that a fair view?
Yes, the opportunities are there within this site to provide connectivity to the north of Ely development. So there are possibilities, and with the conditions that we've imposed, that they can provide a safe, non-motorised access through the site.
Any more questions for the officer? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll now move on to general debate. Members, we have an application in front of us. It has been recommended for approval, and the application is confined, as I understand it, into the red lines as in the application. So members, comments, please. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. No, I mean, I looked at this development. It seemed very in keeping. Now we're keeping the green. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of issues brought up that don't really come under our purview about the village green. I mean, I've certainly taken on board the items about cycle access. It does seem to be relevant going forward. Obviously, the officer seems to have suggested, you know, there's a limit to what they can do in connectivity to the north of the site or the west of the site, as it is, but laying the grounds for there. It does seem to me like the rights of access and rights of ways are an issue, but again, it's not really an issue for this planning committee. So given everything considered, you know, I'm quite happy to leave it in the capable hands, but I'd be recommending this, and I would actually like to propose that we do accept it.
I made a note that you are willing to propose support of the application. Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. I think I want to congratulate the officer for all the hard work she's done with the agent, because I think this just shows the fantastic achievement that can be obtained with listening to public opinion, but also working together as a team, which is what we always hope for these applications, but seldom does it happen. I think that we are very fortunate to have all these additional homes, including the 9 affordable properties, especially the smaller size properties that are in huge demand. And I think that there's much talk been made about cycle paths, but let's not forget the Princess of Wales Hospital is due to expand. There's huge potential opportunities here for employment, for people to actually live and work in the same place. So I think, especially with North Ely coming up forward, so I think we're going to find that actually people, we always seem to be so fixed on the fact people have got to go to the station, but actually there's so much more employment in and around Ely. So let's not forget that. And I think this is a prime example of our policy for infill planning, and I think it's just fantastic, and I'm very happy to support Councillor Jones and also recommend this for approval as it stands, Chair.
Okay, so I won't stop conversations, but we have a proposal from Councillor Jones that we accept the officer's recommendation, and that has been seconded by Councillor Stubbs. The next one is Councillor Ambrose Smith, and then it will be Councillor Brown.
To the travel plan, although I put it in the report that we will request a travel plan by condition, I have omitted it from the list of conditions. So, you know, with members' consent, could I add the travel plan? Do apologise.
Of course, that should be included.
Yeah.
And that is okay by you and by you. So both the proposed and the second agree with that. Okay, so we're now on to Councillor Ambrose Smith.
I think you've done made the best of a good starting point. Yes, of course, there are one or two things, but you're never going to have a totally satisfactory outcome. And as has been mentioned, the development we hope which will take place at the Princess of Wales will add a great deal to the development. So I will certainly be approving this.
Thank you, Councillor Ambrose Smith. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I think as a committee, we also want to recognise the amount of work that's gone in by the applicant, together with officers, to respond to all the concerns that were raised from the initial application. It was mentioned earlier on, but as a committee, I think we want to be recognising that as well. In fact, it's gone now from 53 to 27 in response to the concerns raised.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to make a member comment at this point. We all know that this site has been almost an embarrassment to the people of Ely over many years. These perfectly sound houses and this perfect location have been unused for many years, and it's great to see them coming back, and it's great to see that a proportion are going to be affordable, which is more than the minimum that's required. And there is a possibility of more in the future. I think the fact that the original application was for 53 houses, and that is now come down to 27, I think is an example of a listening council. And I commend the officers for their pragmatism, hard work and flexibility, as well as professionalism that they've exhibited in this case. I now think it's appropriate, and I don't have any more speakers, so I think I'm going to go. We have a proposal from Councillor Jones, seconded by Councillor Stubbs. Is everybody clear that it is to accept the officer's recommendation? If that's the case, will those in favour please raise their hands? Was that unanimous?
That's unanimous.
Okay, so that's unanimous and the application is approved. If any members of the public wish to leave now, they're more than welcome to, or they're more than welcome to stay. We're just having a break for a couple of minutes. It won't be very long. I do beg your pardon, I turned over too many pages. So we're now on agenda number 5, and we have the officer presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item number 5 seeks planning permission part retrospectively for the retention and expansion of concrete casting beds and the construction of a production building comprising a Class B2 general industrial use. The casting beds and the B2 use are the elements of the application which are seeking planning permission retrospectively. The proposed production building has not been constructed. The application has been brought to planning committee as required by the council's constitution, as it's a full planning application for a major employment use. This slide shows the application site outlined in red, with access from the existing access to the site from the north side of Wisbeach Road. The application site is part of a wider commercial premises operated by the applicant in connection with the existing concrete products manufacturing business. The commercial premises has different established uses for different parts of the premises. The existing established planning use of the application site is for open storage relating to the manufacturing of concrete products. The application site is located outside of the development framework for Littleport, and it forms part of a wider allocation site for B1, B2, B8 employment uses, which is allocated by policy Lit 4 of the East Cambridgeshire Local Plan. The application site is also located in flood zone 3. The slide shows an aerial image of the application site showing the general context of the area. This slide here shows the an adjacent planning permission, which is material to the current application, but is not represented on the previous slides. So this relates to planning permission 16/01121/FUM, which was granted on land to the north and west of the application site for change of use of agricultural land to industrial class P2 use and erection of a concrete manufacturing facility with associated engineering and accommodation works and extension to an existing building and travelling crane rails. This slide shows some of the plans relevant to that adjacent planning permission to provide further context to the surrounding area. The letters ABC, which I have added to the plans, are for the sole purpose of trying to represent the general location of certain areas of the application site, with the letters corresponding on the location plan in the top right-hand side of the screen, and the site plan extracts, which are the bottom two images. This shows the location plan for the current application. So this is current application site outlined in red. This shows the site plan for the proposed development, showing the siting of the production building, which would cover the concrete casting beds. This slide shows elevations and sections of the proposed production building. This slide shows side elevations of the proposed building. The proposed production building would have a footprint measuring approximately 90.4 metres by 27.5 metres and a height of 11 metres at the ridge and 8 metres at the eaves. This slide shows a floor plan of the production building, showing the casting beds within it. This photo shows the locations of the six casting beds which are existing on the site but do not have planning permission. The concrete casting beds are used to manufacture concrete beams. At present, the daily process relating to the casting beds begins at 7 AM and involves precast concrete beams of varying lengths being lifted up from the casting beds by a forklift, the cutting of steel wires which run through the concrete by circular saw, which catches on the edge of concrete beams, the concrete beams being moved to storage areas by forklift, cleaning of the casting beds using the hand tools, laying of steel wires down the length of the casting beds which are then tensioned, and the pouring of concrete into casting beds, divided into varying lengths by rubber spacers and left to set overnight so the above process can be repeated. It should be noted that the applicant states that the proposal would facilitate the use of the plasma cutter to cut through the steel wires rather than the existing circular saw process. The above process would otherwise remain the same. This photo shows where the steel wires are laid across the length of the casting beds and where the concrete is poured into the casting beds to create moulds for the concrete beams. The coloured blocks, you can sort of see within there are the spaces that separate the concrete beams. This photo shows the concrete beams with steel wires running through them being lifted from the casting beds. This photo shows the existing cutting process to separate concrete beams using a circular saw to cut through the steel wires between each length of beam. And this slide shows the concrete beams once they've been separated, at which point they are ready to be removed from the casting beds. The main considerations relevant to this application are the principle of development, residential amenity and noise, visual amenity, flood risk and drainage, highway safety, biodiversity, and energy and water. In respect to the principle of development, the site is allocated for B1, B2, B8 development by policy lit 4 of the local plan. The proposal complies with policy lit 4 and other relevant local plan policies, and the principle of development is considered acceptable. In respect of residential amenity and noise, the applicant's noise assessment concludes that noise from the site would be unlikely to give rise to noise disturbance. The review of the applicant's noise assessment carried out by the acoustics consultant commissioned by the council agrees that the conclusion of the applicant's noise assessment is likely to be correct. It is considered that the noise impacts of the proposed development would be within acceptable limits and will not cause any significant noise impacts to any residential properties. Conditions recommended to restrict the use of the site are recommended to restrict the use of the site, to restrict any cutting within the application site to the use of a plasma cutter and taking place within the production building, to restrict the operation hours, and to restrict the hours of construction and delivery vehicles. This slide shows images of views towards the application site from Wisbeach Road and the A10. And in respect to visual amenity, it's considered that the proposal would be viewed within the context of a backdrop of existing buildings, including other large industrial buildings, and officers consider there be no significant visual amenity impacts. In respect of flood risk and drainage, the application site is located in flood zone 3A. The sequential test is passed, the exception test is not required. There's no significant flood risk or drainage impacts, and the Environment Agency, Internal Drainage Board, and Lead Local Flood Authority have no objections. In terms of highway safety, the proposal is served by an existing access and parking provision. No objection has been received from the Highway Authority. There's no significant impacts upon the safety and convenience of the access, the efficiency of deliveries, or the capacity of the highway network. In respect to biodiversity, officers don't consider to be any harm created by the proposal, and biodiversity enhancements could be secured by a planning condition. In respect of energy and water, officers do not consider to be any significant impacts in respect to this. The condition is recommended that the building meets an appropriate BREEAM standard or equivalent. In summary, the application site is allocated for employment development, and the proposal is considered to be acceptable in principle. Officers consider the proposal to have an acceptable impact in respect to residential amenity and noise, visual amenity, flood risk and drainage, highway safety, biodiversity, and energy and water impacts. And the application is therefore recommended for approval, but this is subject to a couple of the conditions within Appendix 1 needing to be reworded. So in condition 2, it's where it states prior to the commencement of development, that should read prior to commencement of development of the construction build of the production building. And in respect of condition 9, the last sentence should read within 6 months of first occupation of the production building, rather than within 6 months of first occupation of the site. And that's just to address the fact that it's an existing site and there is part of the application is retrospective. So there's development there already. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers registered as objectors, and that's John Bosdet and Peter Preston. If you'd like to come up to the desk, you have 5 minutes between you, and the amber light will go on at 4. Please make sure you've turned the microphones on. And the little red light, yes, well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The first thing I want to say to you is don't believe a word that we say. And why I say that is because everything we're going to say is backed up by the facts. So we look forward to receiving some difficult questions from you and some challenges. Those of us who have lived in the shadow of this plant for many years have watched it expand and expand and expand across the countryside. It now sprawls over a site that's 5 times the size of Ely Leisure Park. It is 30 acres. Now, obviously, the overall environmental impact of this site is the sum of the constituent parts, the environmental impact of the constituent parts. But the environmental impact of this whole expanded site has never been assessed in the round. The council is not just saying to you today that this application is okay on environmental grounds. It is saying, as with previous, and no doubt as with subsequent future expansions, it is saying that the environmental impact of this whole site should not even be assessed. You should just approve without this. Now, the residents and our professional advisors think this is wrong. Whether it is wrong in law is an argument that only the courts will be able to decide. But put aside the esoteric legal arguments, just for a second, what does common sense tell you you should do to assess the overall environmental impact of this site? What's the right thing to do? For more than a year now, pretty much every morning, apart from today, the residents have had to endure plumes of silica dust and screeching sound of a circular saw cutting through concrete blocks produced by the unauthorised casting beds you are now being asked to approve. Can you imagine the disturbance this creates? Council officers have witnessed it. We've sent photographs and videos. Yet this sound impact, a direct consequence of the recent addition of these unauthorised casting bays, has never been assessed by the noise consultants. Last year, when considering a previous application from this company, the council and the same noise consultants made the recommendation that the noise impact to residents of that expansion would be so significant that that planning application should be refused. Now, they are telling you that this new expansion, obviously with an additional noise impact over and above that which they previously deemed to be unacceptable, should now be approved. They are saying to this company, we think you're going to make too much noise, but if you make even more noise, that's okay. The residents argue that the noise resulting from this expansion should be assessed in the context of the noise generated by the whole site. The council and the applicant argue that it's not necessary. Again, I simply say to you, what does common sense say should happen? What's the right thing to do? Planning conditions which are not adhered to and are never enforced don't change anything. If the council has chosen to take no enforcement action, as heavy industry here is built and put to use for at least 6 months without even a planning application being submitted, who could possibly believe that the council would take enforcement action if planning conditions are breached? The applicants knows this, and so do we. The council knows it, and in your heart of hearts, so do you. These planning conditions are just a cop-out that leaves the residents and the environment to suffer the consequences. We've made you aware of numerous factual inaccuracies in the report. It will be unsafe to approve the application on this basis. A line has to be drawn. What is happening here should be assessed in the round. The application should be refused, either here and now, or when all the facts are established and put before you again. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So also I was listening tried to listen quite carefully to some of your points, and we've got a summary of some of your sort of concerns, really. Can I just clarify one part? Is it mainly noise associated rather than visual impact that you are concerned about? It seems to be your main contention, but
The main concern, I think, of all the residents is noise, is impact really, it's noise and dust, and particularly toxic dust, which is what occurs when they cut these beams. Perhaps I'll just explain that what has been described to you within the building is going to be a cutting of the steel reinforcing wires. Because apparently the process now is that there are rubber stops put into the lines of the.
We did see that. So, I mean, we had a quick view this morning, and obviously, you know, it didn't sound quite as loud as we were this morning, but we weren't given to the, they were using a plasma cutter, which is the intended use, and obviously we see the benefits of it. No, so I'm just asking because obviously part of this is about building a sort of warehousing unit around it, which will affect the noise and hopefully reduce it, and dust and things like that. So from that point of view, it would appear from my point of view just to be sort of an improvement upon, you know, and actively benefit you. So I'm just wondering, you know, why there's a discord against, you know, their ideas to develop and improve, and, you know, you consider it not an improvement.
Can I respond to that, please? What is being described to you now, and possibly what you saw today, is not what is happening on the site, has been happening on the site since over a year ago, since August time. And basically what happens with these units, they are certainly produced in sections with these rubber stops to effectively stop the requirement to cut through concrete at those stops. What happens is, and I understand it's as a result of particular orders that come through to the company, if they get an order for products which are not of the same size, not of the standard size that they're producing at the moment, what they do is to take those products to the side. Actually, at the moment, they take it to the side of these casting beds. They then use a circular saw to cut through all of those units, depending on how many they've got to produce.
This session is, if you can, the councillor ask your questions, and if you'd be, it's not another speaking opportunity, it's to answer the questions from the members. Thank you.
I understand, thank you.
Councillor Jones, have you finished? Councillor Trapp.
Thank you. We had a demonstration of the plasma cutter, and I'm not sure whether my colleagues agree, but it produced very little dust, and it produced, I thought, compared to what happens when I use an angle grinder on doing steel, much less noise, probably about half the noise level, and the whole thing will be in a contained building. And I think one of the conditions, I may be wrong, maybe it will come back, was that it would be only plasma cutting. Now, the other thing about you're saying cutting the beams, I'm not sure. I mean, I thought the whole point about the rubber stops was to actually make sure that you've got the right lengths anyway, rather than, and it seems to be rather odd that this company is going to make bigger beams and then cut them. But anyway, that's not beside the point. But I think from what the evidence we've got today, and you may be contradicting this, would seem to be much less noise and dust than what I would say is a hack method with a circular saw.
Well, I think you saw what you were shown today, and it was very quiet today, remarkably. What we to say is, you know, what we've experienced over the last 6 or 7 years. And I don't think there's any dispute about a plasma cutter inside a building causing a noise disturbance. Nobody's saying that. What we are saying is we live next door to the site. The whole site causes extreme noise disturbance, and the addition of the cutting through the equivalent of an angle grinder through concrete blocks outside of this shed is going to add to that noise impact. And all we are saying is that whole noise impact, which is what we experience, should be assessed.
No, any more members' questions? Is that a question, councillor Jones?
Yes.
Well, please go ahead.
I'm just looking at the sort of raised concerns really. I mean, one of them was about drainage and surface water. I mean, it's already hard standing. Have you felt any issues with drainage, particularly within the area? How do you feel, why do you feel this would impact any further?
Are concerns across the board in that area about drainage. Quite often in the winter, you will get standing water on fields around that area.
On the fields, sorry.
Fields, yeah.
Right.
And some of the properties do end up with having water standing in front of them in their front gardens. Now, that's not as a result of this development. That's just simply the situation.
I can understand the grey clay and that area tends to cause a lot of issues, right? But it's not necessarily concerned with this one. That's and finally, just going back to the visual one, I mean, if this is, and depending on how members feel, granted or not, would you feel you need any additional screening? Noise screening would be in place. You talked about screening on one of them, so as a summary. Was that a visual screening or just a noise? Noise, like noise reducing.
As far as I'm aware, I don't think there have been any proposals here to put screening in. One of the worst locations for this noise is the I'll use the directions as they're shown on the plan. North doesn't mean north on this plan, but I'll use what they've got. To the east of the site, as it's called here, properties that operate there, or residents who live there, are really impacted by the noise from this casting bay production, over and above what there was ever there before. And I'm not sure there's any suggestions that there could be any screening of the site at that point. There are practical considerations because
this is a period of questions which just need an answer, it's not another speaking opportunity.
Trying to answer it, thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, but it would be appreciated if it could be quicker. Councillor Jones, have you any more questions?
Yeah. Just working about the working hours, you said there was a discord again between the working hours currently on different parts of the site. Are they significant ones? If you got them to hand, obviously we'll ask the officer relevant.
Okay, if I can just explain, the existing storage area site was approved in 2014, and that has different working hours, not substantially different, but they are different, particularly I think on the Saturday working, but the case officer will be able to explain that. But there are differences.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's at the end of the members' questions. If it is, you can return to your seats, and thank you. And Mr. Hamill. It's 5 minutes, Mr. Hamill, and can you make sure you switch your microphone on?
Thank you, Chair, and members for allowing me to present to you this afternoon. My name is Paul Hamill. I'm a chartered planning consultant and I'm the estates manager for FP McCann. Firstly, we very much welcome the recommendation to approve this application by the planning officer. I certainly don't want to oversimplify the proposal, but the committee members will have seen on their site visit that the development site is entirely located within an existing operational area and one which already benefits from planning permission. The site was originally approved for B2 uses in 2014 and has been in continuous use since then.
Excuse me, Chair. We can't hear the gentleman.
Sorry.
Yes, and don't get into too much of a worry about going 5 or 10 seconds at the end. So please speak a little bit slower. Thank you.
I think it's equally important to highlight that the site has already been the subject of a detailed assessment by the council in its own preparation of the local plan. And following this assessment, the development site along with other lands were identified as being a suitable location for B1, B2 and B8 uses. The plan was properly advertised and was the subject of a public examination. To our knowledge, there were no concerns raised by neighbours or consultees at that time, and the lands were subsequently allocated for employment uses under the adopted policies of the local plan. As outlined within the officer's report, the potential impacts relating to highways, visuals, ecology and drainage have all been assessed in detail, and no significant impacts have been identified. I would also like to direct the committee's attention to paragraph 7.43 and 8.4 of the officer's report, which specifically relate to noise. Following a detailed assessment by our own noise consultant and an independent expert review, which was commissioned by the council, the noise associated with this proposal is judged to be well within acceptable limits and will not cause any significant impact at residential properties. Much has been made of the potential noise impact by two objectors to the proposal. In the first instance, I want to highlight that both of the objectors' properties are located approximately 600 metres from the development site. For completeness, these properties were included in the noise assessment, but as expected, no adverse impact was identified, and this is largely due to the significant separation distances involved. In practical terms, I think it's easy to see that the proposed development can only result in benefits for both our neighbours and our staff. The proposed building will not only screen potentially noisy and dusty activities, but they will also provide shelter for our employees during winter months and will reduce the curing time of our products. The committee may already be aware, but the objectors to this application have consistently opposed our presence at Littleport since we acquired the site in 2013. There has been an orchestrated campaign of opposition from a couple of individuals who claim to represent the wider community. This campaign has included judicial challenges and appeals, all of which has resulted in significant delays and considerable cost to both the applicant and the council. Considering the claims which have been made by the objectors, it is interesting to note from the officer's report that more than 100 properties were notified about this application and were invited to provide comment. And yet only two individuals, both of whom live more than half a kilometre from the site, have raised concerns. In contrast, over the past 9 years, FP McCann has made significant and much needed investments at Littleport, creating and sustaining long-term employment at the site. The products which are manufactured there are used in nationally significant construction projects, such as the Alexander Stadium in Birmingham, which was recently used for the Commonwealth Games. Utility products from the site are being used in large infrastructure schemes such as the Viking Link interconnector. Our specialist railway products have been used in countless station upgrades across the country, including recent projects at Soham and Cambridge. In conclusion, the proposed development fully accords with the requirements of the local plan and national policy, and it uses lands which have been specifically identified for this purpose by the council. Notably, the site already benefits from planning permission and it forms an established industrial area. All potential impacts from the proposal have been identified and are not judged to be significant. No concerns have been raised by the planning officer or the expert consultees, and in these circumstances, it is difficult to identify a valid planning reason to refuse this application. The planning balance here would strongly suggest that the significant benefits of this proposal far outweigh any negative impacts, and I would respectfully ask the committee to move to approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Councillor Trapp, then Councillor Brown.
I have about 3 questions. One is the, for instance, one of the conditions I notice here is only plasma cutting will be used for within the building, or all the cutting will be within the building, and it will be done by the plasma cutter. Is that acceptable?
Yes, that's fully acceptable. If I could elaborate just quickly on that point, Councillor. The plasma cutter, as you've seen, is on site and ready to use, but it can't be used outdoors because of the gases and the way it works. It can't be used outdoors because of rain, basically. If it were to rain, it can't be safely used outdoors. So that's the only reason it's not in use at the moment.
The second question I have is, I noticed a lot of steel structures. We're very interested. I love these steel structures that you have in the cast. How are those cut? Are they cut by plasma cutters already, or are they by
the steel within the beams will be cut with a plasma cutter.
No, not within the beams. I'm talking about the other structures you make, like the verandas, the terraces, balconies, steps, they've got lots of steel in them and
Yes.
they've been preformed. How are they cut?
Yeah, a mixture happens. Some are fabricated on site or some are brought to site, councillor. But just to be clear, and again, I don't want to distract, but I think the issue of the cutting is somewhat of a distraction with this application, because the entire area to the south from where the proposed development is to West Beach Road is approved for B2 uses. So concrete cutting could lawfully happen on any part of that site. And similarly, it could happen anywhere in the extension site, which was approved under the 2016 application. So there's over 20 acres of either permitted or existing industrial workspace for the cutting of concrete if we had to do that.
Right, and the last question is, do you produce your own concrete, and is that a noisy process? We didn't hear anything, but
Yes, the concrete is mixed on site. You may have noticed some aggregate bays during your visit, which is a mixture of sand and fine aggregates. Those are transferred to a mixing plant where the cement is blended with it on the side of our main factory building. And that process is all effectively built into our existing operations. There's no changes to that process proposed.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hummel. Mine's a slightly different question. I noticed in the paperwork that the Fire and Rescue Service were requesting a planning condition regarding provision of fire hydrants if the committee is minded to grant permission. And yet, I'll take it up with officers later on in the debate, but they say that they don't see that as necessary. Would you accept a condition to satisfy Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service? Because I have grave concerns about this committee going against the advice of the Fire and Rescue Service.
Yeah, it's a fair question, councillor, and the one which I've discussed with the planning officer. As an established site and an operation that's ongoing, I certainly didn't feel that the need to include fire hydrants was a reasonable one, especially given the amount of industrial neighbours we have along this beach road. It's something we would accept, but as a planning professional, I agree with the case officer. I don't think it's a necessary requirement.
Thank you. I'm no planning expert, but it just seems to be logical to me.
Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Mr. Hamill. Couple of things. I understand we're looking at a retrospective application. Now, I understand the applicant's very well versed with the planning process. Why was this not actually approval sought prior to it coming for us today? Given that you're very much aware of the neighbours' views of the site and what they've said today.
Well, councillor, I think there's maybe some dispute in the first instance as to the use. We did apply for a B2 use on that part of the yard back in 2013, which was approved. So there was maybe some misunderstanding, but it was my understanding that the beds would be allowable under permitted development. The council disagreed with that view, obviously, and that's why the application was submitted. But to explain why the beds were installed, it was something we noticed as an opportunity in the market. There was an increase in demand for T-beam for suspended floor products. And that's why, time was of the essence to really strike on that and to try and get our foot in the door, so to speak.
Okay, if I may, Chair. A couple of other questions. Is there only one plasma cutter?
I believe there's two. I can check that with management, but I believe there's two, and they're a costly piece of equipment.
Right.
And obviously it's not our intention to buy them and leave them sitting there. It's our intention to use them if this application is successful.
Right, okay, so there's a very limited number of plasma cutters, but they will all be used inside.
Yeah.
And the last one, the objectors talked about dust and how much dust was actually flying around the site until today. So given the conditions that were in this site, how do you control that? What's your view on that?
Well, the conditions, as you would have seen this morning, are probably at their worst, with a relatively dry day this morning, and high winds. The dust, again, I would like to highlight to the council that there may have been some misunderstanding. There were comments or complaints made some months ago, and the site was visited basically by environmental health and the planning team. As it turned out that the dust, or what people thought was dust, was actually steam rising off the beds. The products are heated to assist in the curing process. So it was early morning, cold temperatures. When the products were lifted, it was actually steam coming off the beds. But on top of that, and I suppose outside the remit of planning, the site holds a pollution prevention control permit, which is issued by the Environmental Protection Team. And we have umpteen conditions and requirements on that. So that is primarily what is used to control and police dust emissions from the site. And that's there regardless of the outcome of this application.
Thank you. And again, my earlier comments to others would apply. How many jobs have you got? What's the total employed people on the Little Port site?
And the total at the moment, Chairman, is 100 or close to 100. The extension site, which isn't the subject of this application, will see another probably 90 jobs. So when that is constructed, we'll be looking at close to 200.
So what was the figure?
It'll be close to 200 in total. It's close to 100 at present. And when the extension plan is completed,
the gentleman I spoke to this morning said 70.
But we have lost staff as a result of COVID and Brexit, Chair. I don't mean to as it would be dishonest about it, but we had at a peak probably 95 personnel on site, up to maybe 2019, 2020. So that obviously has had an impact.
Okay, and am I right in assuming and that the building you intend to construct it wouldn't just be one sort of sheet of steel, it would be insulated for heating purposes and also for sound purposes. Am I right? Or
Yes, that's correct, Chair. At ground level, it actually would be using our own concrete wall panels up to a height of about 2.5 meters. And above that then would be clad in steel, in insulated steel cladding. So on top, as you rightly say, on top of enclosing the heat, it also would have noise attenuation benefits.
okay, thank you. Well, with that, unless anybody else has got any, yeah, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just have a clarification? Obviously, we had a site visit this morning. It did seem to be quite quiet. They weren't cutting any concrete beams at the time. Can you confirm or deny? Do they actually, whether it's miscast products or things like that, cut down beams on site?
Thanks for bringing that point up, Councillor. To clarify on that, it's not, as someone I think mentioned earlier, it's not in our interest to cut products to a size for a customer. The spacers you've seen in the beds, we have a standard range of product sizes, and we generally try to stick to those as far as possible. On occasion, we will be asked for odd lengths or something very specific. So we will, there's no denying it, we will have to cut beams on occasion, but that would be very much the exception rather than the rule. And another issue which I should make the committee aware of, we've had to cut beams in recent months or in the past year, really, because of constraints on storage at the site. We've been trying to discharge the final condition on the adjacent application, which will obviously open up a lot more storage space for us. But that's why we basically couldn't keep enough stock of our products because of limitations on the ground.
Just to follow on from that, can you confirm you've got permission on the other parts of the site to cut the concrete beams, not on this section? Will all cutting be done on the site you have got B2 permission on? And
yes, I'm not sure if our manager for the site had an opportunity to show you it today, but all concrete cutting has been moved to the permitted B2 area, which isn't really too far from the beds, but it's slightly closer to our office building and entrance. So that has already been done on site.
Is there any soundproofing around that? Can you just confirm, or is there any intention in future to put any soundproofing around it? Obviously, would be quite a noisy activity and would benefit?
Well, to say a formal soundproofing, no, but it does take place in an area which has steel containers on two sides and a concrete wall on one side. So it is enclosed, or there are barriers around it as far as possible. So it is, you know, as good as it can be without basically fully enclosing it with a building essentially.
Is there any opportunities to use sound deadening materials, rock wool, stuff like that?
Yes, no, absolutely, and that's something again. There's some crossover here, I suppose, between planning permissions and our environmental permit. But that's something that could be really embedded into our environmental permit. I think would be the best place for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have we got any more comments from the officer?
Just to say that if members have sort of got any comments regarding noise and dust pollution, anything like that, we do have Sean Sullivan of AAPB with us, who are the noise consultants that were commissioned by the council to review the applicant's noise assessment. And we've also got Karen C as well from Environmental Health, who can answer any sort of general sort of inquiries that members might have regarding sort of dust or noise pollution, environmental health legislation and so on.
The next section is questions by the members to the officers. So I was looking for comments from you at this stage.
Comments from me on what, sorry?
No. Have you finished with your comments?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Members, have you got any questions for the officers? Councillor Trapp, and sorry, I beg your pardon. You can
No problem.
resume your
Sure whether
speech.
to go, but thank you, everyone.
This is questions for the officer, and it was Councillor Trapp.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just, would it be best for, if there's anything that sort of comes up regarding noise, is it best for Sean from AAPB to come and sit up here, or would it be best if he sits at the table over there?
I should just sit where you are.
Oh.
Sean, if you'd sit at that table and be prepared to make any answers that people may have. So this is questions to the officer, and that would include Sean. So, Councillor Trapp.
Thank you very much. You mentioned building B in your plan. Do you know what height that is? Is there any indication of what the height of that building is?
The height of so you're talking about on the adjacent appeal site. I think it was, so that's not been constructed yet, but I think it's 13 meters high.
So it's higher than the proposal here, which is 11.
I believe so.
We're in harmony today, Councillor Trapp. Would it be possible to see a building B, the proposed building B? You had a slide that showed it adjacent to the site. There you go. Yes, so the building there in B would almost shield what we're talking about today. Would that be fair to say?
I don't think it would shield
Would
it.
it not shield it entirely?
No. So the building we are looking at today has, I believe, a bigger footprint than that building there. I suppose that building would sort of screen, you know, provide some screening from Little Mare Fen Drove, but it would still be sort of visible from a lot of sort of other aspects of Little Mare Fen Drove and also sort of Wisbeach Road, for instance, and also from the A10. So you'd get sort of sight of it from some other areas as well.
Partial screening.
There would be partial screening from it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all I wanted. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Richard, returning to the that I raised earlier on. I accept that this new building is within the confines of an existing commercial site, but with it being a new building, why aren't we asking for fire hydrants in it?
think that's addressed within in the officer report, just bear with me. It was also with a stance we have sort of repeated from the adjacent the appeal site. So yeah, paragraph 7.72 of the report states that Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue has requested a conditional planning obligation to secure the provision of fire hydrants. However, as a proposed development is within the confines of an existing commercial site, it is considered that this request would not meet the relevant tests of the planning condition or a planning obligation. So that was the stance that was taken on the adjacent appeal site. So it's the stance we've taken on this application as well.
Councillor Stubbs next. And then Jones.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask Sean some about, is it noise, Sean? Yeah. So the objectors have made much of the noise. So what's been happening in the last 6 months, but obviously prior to that, and then the concerns about adding on top of that the additional productivity. Can you give us some more information about, so they've criticised basically your findings. So can you actually respond to that?
Yes, certainly. I reviewed the Hawley assessment and they have with the client made assumptions about what the activities will be on the application site. But I did my own independent investigations into the assumptions that they were making on noise levels and on noise propagation as well. And based on that, and assuming a worst case scenario, which is explained in both the Hawley report and mine, I do not think there'll be a significant impact at any of the residents due to the new activities. And that's assuming that which may not be the case, that's assuming that the new building has all its shutters up 3 meters high, which it may not, it may close them, of course. But that will be the dominant noise source breaking out of the site. It will be through those open shutters, not through the building envelope, as I think some of you are worried about. And I don't think that will be of concern when compared to the background noise level, which we've estimated at the nearest residence. That's been estimated on previous applications over the last few years. So I'm not anticipating a significant impact at the nearest residence for this application.
Can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you. And this lady, Richard, is it's environmental health, you said? Ooh.
Sorry, this is Karen C from Environmental Health for the council.
And I can ask Karen about dust and.
Yeah, so Karen's sort of not sort of familiar with all of the details of the application, but she's here more for general inquiries about sort of dust and so on. So.
Okay, so Karen, you've assessed this site, have you, and the findings in the report, and you've heard the criticism as well from the objectors. So can you comment on your views and what you've heard today?
Yeah, obviously, one of my members of staff kept a watching brief over the information between the consultant from the applicant and also from the council. So, and he was confident and satisfied that the information that was presented was correct, accurate, and that there would be no significant impact in the noise terms from this building and this application. So that was my colleague, obviously had more details with that, but just a few points on the dust and the noise. We have received noise complaints and dust complaints from the site, and we have investigated it under our statutory nuisance requirements. Officers have been out on numerous occasions and have not been able to witness significant dust deposits coming off the site. Now, there are incidences of dust on site, but obviously we're more interested, excuse me, on dust coming off the site. I know there was one incident, early morning monitoring at 7:24. The officer was there to try and witness the noise and the dust that the residents had been complaining about from the casting bays. And steam and vapour could be seen only when the cutter started could dust be seen, but there was no deposition of the boundary of the site. It was all contained within the site. So there were a number of other monitoring inspections as well. And one other thing just about Paul Hamill saying about the noise under the permit. Noise isn't included in the permit under the local authority permitting regime. It's just considered as dust and, you know, emissions of that nature. So we don't actually, we can't look at noise under the permitting regime. But obviously under the correct existing permit, there are conditions that require control of general dust on the site and that it shouldn't be outside the boundary.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, a couple of questions, if I may. One to Sean. I mean, obviously you gave Councillor Stubbs some just overviews. I'm just a little concerned. You said obviously you were forecasting on what you were on the expected values. Was that only using the plasma cutter, or was that using a saw, circular saw as well? Because I can well see if the plasma cut breaks down, if they've got a circular saw sitting.
It was using the plasma cutter. So the reverberant level within the building was based on this. The reverberant level is the noise inside the building, and that's caused by all the activities in the building. And I'm fairly sure that the plasma cutter was assumed to be dominant in the building. So it was, yes, plasma cutting. Answer your question. That's the assumption.
I'm surprised by, we heard a plasma cutting demonstration, and I've seen them in other bits on metal, and it's not particularly noisy. So I was surprised that it's the dominant one.
It's, well, if you hold on a second, I'll just check.
I mean, I wouldn't worry too much.
It may have been also very significant would have been vehicle movements within the building as well, I think. Forklift trucks. So there may have been other sources. So perhaps dominant is not the best word. Significant would have been a better word to use there.
Could you, and I know you perhaps want to put it in context, but what sort of noise levels, decibel levels were the neighbours getting? Did you do a noise assessment at the properties, or of those ones, or the edge of the boundary of the properties? Have you got actual acoustic measurements?
We've worked on, this is the third application for the site that which we've reviewed Hawley reports. And as part of that work, we've carried out noise surveys, including at the local residents or at locations representative of them, but not for this job. This was a pure desktop assessment, but we used the data which we'd gained from other surveys to estimate the background noise in the area. Background noise is a technical term, but it's to think of it as a noise without the site operating.
What sort of levels were they?
They're in the report, they were between about estimated between about 35 and 40, I think, at the nearest residence.
And have you got the edge of the site ones as well? Just so we got a comparison. I know it halves the noise level.
Sorry, have we got the what?
What sort of things were the edge of the site? Did you do an edge of site one comparison to the? Or if you've got, I don't know if you've got that sort of data in hand, but
no, we didn't do an edge of site survey. Although one of the survey locations was quite close to the site, at one of the residents.
one. There was a disparity between working hours on the different parts of the site. Will that be resolved? Is that an issue? Have you got any thoughts on it?
So the site is made up of various planning permissions, and there are different time limits for operation hours on the separate planning permissions. So, I mean, I can only sort of append a condition to sort of restrict hours of operation on this site relevant to this application. I can't sort of go back to previous applications and change those hours, sort of relate off-site.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everybody. The general rules are that each member has one question. I'm always trying to give everyone their fair share. Councillor Trapp, have you got any more questions for the officer?
Yes, I have, which is to follow up Councillor Brown, which is to say, actually, this site where is quite far from the main road, and therefore the idea of fire hydrants might be actually quite beneficial, because it will take quite a bit of time. I don't know what fire hydrants just produces water, doesn't it? It's the pumps for the hose. But you're going to have a long line of hose to get from existing fire hydrants down to that part of the. So I just think one ought to really consider can one put a condition on fire hydrants or not, because of the length of the site?
I think if members are minded to approve the application, that they could add a condition on regarding fire hydrants. That's within.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, members and officers. We now move on to the debate stage, and who's going to kick it off? Councillor Jones.
I mean, I looked at this site. Obviously, noise is a concern for me on this one. It does seem as though it would make improvement on it on dust and noise levels by accepting it. I can accept why the beam sections are there have been put in already, and they're quite removable anyway. They're only bolted to the floor. I do think the fire hydrant aspect is probably a bit misnomer. I'm not sure how flammable concrete is really, but anyway, given that, again, I'm broadly in favour of this. I can't see too many issues. I think, again, the officers will, make sure there's no issues with, runoff or things like that, noise from the site. So, if anybody wants to propose it other than me, then I'm quite happy to support them.
I think, with your permission, Councillor Jones, we'll wait a minute before I take your recommendation. Councillor Huffer.
Well, I have to say, as a ward member for Snellwell, with the EMR site, I only wish EMR could put a great big building over their operation and make it soundproof, because the noise when they are operating anytime from 7:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning till 10:30 at night can be heard as far away as Burwell. And whilst I appreciate that the neighbours believe this to be a really noisy site, until they've actually experienced EMR with their windows open, they haven't heard noise locally, to be honest with you, to that level. So if Councillor Jones isn't proposing, I am quite happy to propose that we accept this. I think this is going to be an improvement. I know they don't see it as an improvement at the moment, but this will be an improvement for the neighbours.
I made a note of your comments, and Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I would be prepared to second Councillor Hopper, provided that we accept the advice of Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service that they think they need fire hydrants. They must have had reasons for saying that. We should put in a condition with Fire and Rescue Service.
I think, Councillor Jones, since we've got other members who are like-minded to you, I'd feel inclined to record councillor Huffer's proposal. Yes.
Thank you. Just in sort of response to councillor Huffer's comments, just in terms of the proposal improving the situation, I think we just need to bear in mind that the casting beds that are there at present don't have planning permission. The site at present has planning permission for an open storage use. So, you know, if we're talking about the conditions would improve, I think we'd need to sort of expand on why we think that, but it's just I think if it's a case of we're looking at what's there in terms of the casting beds at the moment and putting a production building over the top would reduce the noise impacts, we should kind of be viewing it as the open storage use and that the casting beds don't have planning permission, if that makes sense.
All I'm saying is that when this building is constructed over the top of the beds, it's going to improve the noise issue and the dust issue for the residents is what I'm saying. I'm not sure if that's right.
Yeah, just to come in on that, that is correct. If you take, so I think it depends where you take the baseline situation. So the baseline situation in planning terms is there's a storage use on the site. So members, as well as noting a benefit over the existing partially unauthorised situation, need to also be satisfied that it's acceptable to have the casting beds and the building. So we would just want members to be clear in debating this, that the beds don't have permission at the moment. So you need to be satisfied on that. It is also true, as you say, that the impact of beds without the building over will be worse than with, but we just need members to be sure that when they're debating it, they're considering the whole proposal.
Does that prepare?
It doesn't change my
That doesn't
proposal
change
to
your
accept,
proposal that
because,
you want to
and, you
support
know,
the officer
yeah.
recommendation.
And as I understand from the gentleman that I was speaking to today, all these products are sold and distributed within the UK. So again, and it's an employment site. These are bits of equipment that are clearly in desperate need. Otherwise, they wouldn't be expanding the concrete beds. So, but the addition of the building over them, I think, will offer protection for the residents. Is that okay?
Yes, and councillor Brown. Well, I'm sure Caroline will simplify that to say that you agree with the officer recommendation, which might be easier for the minute taking. Councillor Brown, you are happy to second this, councillor Huffer.
Only if councillor Huffer accepts my recommendation to put a condition in on fire insurance. Otherwise, somebody else can second it.
Accept councillor Brown's amendment.
So we have Dan, come in then.
Sorry to keep interrupting, Chair. I just wanted to get in before members vote on whatever proposal they make. We just wanted to be clear. Obviously, Richard said at the start of the meeting there's a couple of conditions that he wanted to update. I would also like, with your agreement, to just slightly tighten up condition 11, really only in the form of words that we use to restrict the B2 use to the building. I'm happy to do that now, or I'm happy to do that under your delegation. I don't mind how you want to do that, Chair. It's just tweaking wording of the condition.
Well, I think if it's tweaking the wording, please let Caroline know now what your wording is.
Okay. So I would just propose that we change the condition so that it reads, the Class B2 use hereby permitted shall only be carried out within the production building. So it's bottom of that, of page 27, sorry, I should have said.
Yeah.
So the Class B2 use hereby permitted shall only be carried out within the production building and not on land outside of the production building, and then the rest stays the same.
So councillor Huffer and councillor Brown, are you happy that those conditions are there? Am I taking that as a yes? is any other members would like to join in the debate period? It looks like we're going to come to a vote, and I'd hate anyone to think they were being restricted in their comments. No, I was going to just say that I was going to thank the applicants for the courtesy they extended to us this morning and made our job a lot easier to have. And the demonstration they put on for us was very helpful. So I'll now, I think we'll go to a vote. Yes, you can read it out. Starts with Councillor Huffer in a shortened version.
Yeah, no, just to clarify that, so the motion is proposed by Councillor Huffer, seconded by Councillor Brown, and it's to approve the officer, to go with the officer recommendation for approval, plus a condition for regarding hydrants, updates to conditions 2 and 9 as explained at the start, and the change to condition 11 as just discussed. So given that you need a condition for hydrants, can you also delegate authority to draft that condition?
Are those members in favour?
That's unanimously in favour.
Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Those people who'd like to lead now are more than welcome. And it is now, I make it about 8 minutes past the quarter. We will adjourn now and resit at quarter past 4. So it's a short comfort break.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon again. We are now back in session and we're now moving on to item number 6 and we're looking for the officer proposal.
Thank you, Chair. I'm obviously filling in for Isabella, and it's for agenda item 6, which is for the replacement of a conifer hedge with a 6-foot wooden fence at 101 Clay Street, Soham. So as we can see, this is the location. The site is within the conservation area. It's also within the development envelope for Soham. It is also on a corner plot where the road of Mill Corner, Clay Street and Mearside meet. And this is an aerial view. You can see it's predominantly residential. Although there are obviously some industrial activities more to the north of the site. So this picture has been given to us by the applicant showing the proposed fence in the street. And please bear in mind, it is obviously retrospective, so this is why we have photographs. These are pictures of the original hedge. So you can see on the corner of Clay Street and Mill Corner and Mearside, you can visibly see the hedge as you can looking more towards Mearside. So the main considerations of the application are the impact on the character of the street scene and the conservation area and the design quality of the fence. So in terms of the character of the area, if you're looking west towards Clay Street, you can see there is predominantly open frontages. Obviously, there are fences between boundaries, but predominantly it is small fences or low brick walls to the front boundary. Looking north towards Mearside, again, you can see it's also quite open. There are fences between boundaries, but again, it is predominantly low walls and fences. Looking towards Mill Corner, obviously you can see that there is a hedge and low fencing, and obviously you can see in the forefront the proposed or the existing fence that we are discussing today. Just want to bring members' attention to, and I should point out that this won't be shown on the live stream because this was added after this was uploaded, so please accept my apologies, that in 2019 an application was submitted and again this was retrospective for the demolition of a wall and the replacement with a wooden fence, and I've shown where this was to take place. The application was withdrawn following a recommendation of refusal from the local authority, and they have now planted boundary hedging instead of a fence. So obviously this is something we need to consider as a material consideration in the determination of this application. Design quality, there are issues. It's not, obviously we have what I call gravel boards, some call them barge boards or kick boards, and then you have a large fence with trellis on top, sort of equating to 1.6 to 1.8 meters in height. In terms of the other main considerations, residential amenity, there's not considered to be any harm to the adjoining neighbours. In terms of highways, there are no highway safety concerns. However, there are construction infringements upon the footpath and are a potential trip hazard, which the local highways authority are aware of and may seek their own enforcement action. So in terms of the summary and recommendation, it is recommended for refusal. It is out of keeping with the character of the area. The scale, design and the materials cause harm to the visual amenity of the character of the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a local ward member, Councillor Mark Goldsack, and if you'd like to come up to the desk, I'm sure you're aware you've got 5 minutes and the amber light will go on at 4.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with this with an apology that Mrs. Tracy Jinks was confirmed as suffering from COVID this morning, tested, so that's why she's not with me today. I would like to look at the aspects of what the officer has just presented on behalf of her colleague There are negative aspects of a legal and planning basis. This is a retrospective planning application. Mrs. Jinks sends her apologies for this. Mr. and Mrs. Jinks, although they're no longer married, this is their home, and they had absolutely no idea. It was ignorance, and I know that's no defence, but since being pointed out, they've dealt with every aspect of a retrospective planning application. There are negative opinions on this. The visual impact is opinion. The word discordant design was an opinion. Pathway damage and the conservation impact. There are positives outcomes to this. The safety for the children involved and the maintenance of said area. There are also positive opinions, which contradict the negative opinions in design, fit, and visual impact. We're in a very difficult position here. The officer, and forgive me, showed some site scenes, didn't mention once the very large and over-intruding industrial building that's just across the road. Funny that, isn't it? You've got a photo of it. Keep going, keep going. There you go. So that hedge you can see there is the hedge that's been taken out. You can also see the damaged and the dying bits of the hedge, which is why it was taken out. So if it's not in accordance with the scene, that's the view opposite. I noticed two involved people on the application. You've said that this is doing harm and visual harm to a conservation area. I draw your attention, please, to section 5.1 of your document. I think it's 5.1. Yes, 5.1. I'll say section 4. Conservation officer, no comments received. So a conservation officer was asked to look into this and hasn't given any comments, neither positive nor negative, hasn't come back to us. So either our system's broken here or there's no case to answer. Okay. Very good point that the officer raised about the some years ago application that decided to then put it in. But I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And the best beholder we've got on this particular case is the neighbour. And the neighbour has actually positively commented, also in 5.3, I think it is. 6 neighbouring properties were notified and a response received from one neighbour is summarised below. I support the application on the basis it's improved light received and outlook from my window. It's the direct neighbour there whose window you can see on the far right hand side. So what I'm asking here is, we've got a problem with the highways, absolutely bang to rights. Mr. Jinks has now fixed that and all been addressed. It's been tarmacked. I have actually supplied photographs to the officers of those changes that have been made. The concrete, you would have seen them this morning or whenever you did your view. Hedges do grow, even the dying parts still grow. So there are constant issues with access for people walking around that. There's not with a fixed fence. And as I say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think if you look directly opposite to the northeastern side, there is a fence on the property which starts with about a 3 to 4 foot brick wall. And then there's a very standard larch lap fence on the top of it that actually goes to a height of about 8 foot at its maximum. You know, you kind of look at that and you think, how ugly is that compared with somebody that's actually really thought about the design and impact of this and put in a nice design fence with the trellis work that's met their neighbours' improvements. So, look, I understand that we don't want retrospective planning applications and the Jinkses have paid their dues and said sorry for that. But what we've got here today, and you've had some really meaty matters in your first two today, may seem a trivial one. But Mr. and Mrs. Jinks does the childcare arrangements for their grandchildren. They want a safe garden for them to play in. This is what they've deemed to do. And that's why I had to call this in, I'm afraid. I don't like wasting council's time, but I had to call this in today because in speaking to the officer in question, we couldn't make any progress on this. So as far as I'm concerned, they've met their reasons. They've put a nice fence up. And as to say that this is out with the area, the conservation area says no, and it's next to a big industrial unit, which with the good of this fence, they don't have to sit in there, lounge and stare at. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
We now have questions for Councillor Goldsack. Linnea.
Can I ask you if you know how tall the hedge was in relation to the fence now? Was it taller or similar height?
I'm told it was up. I was told it was between 6 and 9 foot, but I don't know exactly because I can only go, but if you go on Google, you can't do it now, but if you look at Google Street Views, the hedge is still showing on there, and I think you can see approximately the height of it. But bear in mind, that's the height of it probably after it's just been cut. So there are times when they do grow a bit more than that.
Any other questions for Councillor Goldsack? Councillor Goldsack, did you say that the applicant had tried to come to a sort of pragmatic agreement with the officers?
Through myself, sir. Mr. and Mrs. Jinks, by their own admission, aren't IT gurus. They wouldn't be familiar with PCs. They spoke to me about it. I told them to speak to the officer, Isabella, I think it was the officer. And I actually spoke to Isabella about it myself. And it was just comes down to the matter of an officer here doesn't think that it's in keeping with the local scene and the issues with the highways. The issues with the highways have been fixed. There's no adverse comments from the conservation officer. So from my point of view, I think that only leaves down an argument on visual impact.
Thank you.
Yes. Hello, Councillor Goldsack. You just mentioned, I know this is not part of the application, but you've mentioned a couple of times, you said that the issues with highways have been fixed. Are you sure that that's been accepted? Because what we saw today hasn't, I didn't think it had been fixed.
Right. What you would have saw in the original application was
No, what we saw today.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I'm going to explain. What you saw, what there was a triangular of concrete coming from the base before I think the officer mentioned barge board. Let's call them barge board. There was a triangular of concrete that impinged onto the path. That's been taken out and been backfilled with black asphalt, as far as I can see, which should now have made that path acceptable to County Council. Whether it's to County Council standards or not, I don't know, and I wouldn't be for me to
No,
judge.
that's fine, but I say that's for them to agree with council, so it's not part of our decision making anyway. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ambrose Smith.
I was staggered along that path, and quite honestly, it's a pig's ear. It seemed tidy enough beside the fence, but the bit near the curb was all over the show. The whole thing needs doing, and I really the fence, quite honestly, isn't what I would choose, but I'm sure it looked better than a tatty hedge, and I think it's probably safer. So I think it's a shame it's come to this, really. But yeah, the path isn't great, but I don't think that's necessarily on the part of the applicant.
Councillor Ambrose Smith, we will be moving into debate later. These are questions for the local councillor.
I was wondering if Councillor Goldsack had noticed the miserable state of the path.
The state of the paths, I can answer that, Chair, if I can. The state of the paths all the way round have been reported to the local highways officer, a gentleman called Bob Rossiter. If you walk about 80 yards further round towards the mill, the old mill thing, there is no path. It's disintegrated into nothing but gravel. And people have complained to the county councillor, who happens to be me as well, about the standard of the paths, and it's on the operations to get looked at.
No. I thought I saw your hand. Councillor Trapp for questions. Okay. It appears you can sit down, Councillor.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Now, comments from the officer, please. Further comments, if you have any.
I do. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'd like to draw your attention to the application that is withdrawn, and that was an officer recommendation. It does occupy a corner plot, and there was a recommendation of refusal for a boundary fence in that location, which is about 5 dwellings away from this site. I'd also like to draw your attention to a recent appeal at Dunstan Street, where we refused a 2-metre high fence on the boundary, and it went to appeal where the inspector upheld our appeal on the basis that the harm that was caused by the fence was greater than the safety issues that were being presented by the applicant. Thank you, Chair.
We now move on to questions for the officer. Councillor Stubbs, were you on?
Tony, so councillor Goldsack mentioned he drew attention to the fact that the conservation officer had not commented. Now, I know this is Isabella's one, but it is mentioned in the recommendation of refuse that the development fails to preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area. Can you comment on why the conservation officer didn't make any comments?
I'm just going to let Dan do this because he spoke with Isabella on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I think it's important for members just to be advised that the lack of an objection from the conservation officer, or where he does not return comments, doesn't indicate that he doesn't have some concerns. He would, I think, consider this. He obviously is the sole conservation officer in the district, and he will quite often speak informally to officers and say that he's happy for them to take a view on it. So the absence of an objection, I think, doesn't indicate that he is supportive of it or otherwise. It's just he doesn't comment on every single application in a conservation area, and would often, with this type of application, delegate that decision to officers. So I wouldn't want members to be, I mean, members can reach their own judgment on it, obviously, but I wouldn't want them to take the view that because there's no objection, the conservation officer is obviously happy.
This is a question from me to the officer. Am I right in thinking that if this were rejected today, another application could be accepted on a no-cost basis?
That's correct, Chair.
And would it, if that happened, would officers be talking to the applicant and discussing things like the tarmac and the height and things like that?
That's correct, Chair. Like I said, the application further up the road that was discussed about putting planting in front of a fence and trying to soften the appearance of a fence. So that is not beyond the realms of possibility, so certainly.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. In the years I've been on planning committees, would the officer agree with me that we're supposed to be looking at what's in front of us, irrespective of what happened down the road when something was withdrawn, or irrespective of what happened elsewhere in the town when somebody went to appeal?
We have to take into consideration material considerations, and in a similar location further up the road at 90 Clay Street and at Dunstan Street, where safety was used as an example for why the fence was required and lost at appeal, in terms of it was lost by the applicants, then there are similarities that we draw from that and we use it as a material consideration.
I've got no more questions for the officer, so I'm now going into general debate. Members, your comments, please. Councillor Huffer.
Well, with all due respect to Tony, I stood on the corner and I saw at least 3 very ugly 6-foot fences that were a lot less attractive than this on a corner plot, not far away from this particular dwelling. An 8-foot unruly Leylandii hedge, personally, I think is much more harmful to the environment, the appearance of the environment or of that area than as I agree with Councillor Ambrose Smith, it wouldn't be my first choice for a fence, but it was neat, it was clean, and it looked perfectly acceptable to me in the general scheme of things that we saw in that area. Immediately opposite, there was a brick wall that was about 1 metre high, with again another metre of close boarded fencing that's literally just on the opposite corner. So I can see absolutely no harm personally in this fence.
Okay, any other members' comments? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the previous one, number 90, I do remember this one coming up. It didn't come up for us, but the local. I think there were some objections from the highway in the way at that particular one. I know the parish council did object to it. But if you did notice, what they ended up doing was they immediately put up another one because it's the only bit of garden they had at the front one in the same way this one is. They immediately put another one up a foot inside, and then they put the trees up to grow, which is obviously what's being asked here. They've got a much bigger garden at the other one. It is much more acceptable. And it was, I believe, going from memory, there was some highway issues, I think, about visibility going into the road sort of thing. So I do think it's a slightly different situation in this one. I must admit, I do feel for my fellow ward councillor, yeah, I can't see a lot wrong with this. It does seem to be an improvement. I know there's a few issues along where I live that's got some overgrown hedging, and on a tight corner like that, it's much better to have the path clear than it is to have a hedging there that can get overgrown and is subject to, you know, council having to come along and cut it or putting enforcement orders in. So on the balance of things, I think it is an improvement. Yeah, well, I feel for the council, the officers, and the situation we put them in. You know, for them supporting other ones where it isn't appropriate. In this case, I think I'm siding with Councillor Huffer. I think on this one, it is inappropriate. It is appropriate, not inappropriate. Yeah, I think I'd be going against the officer's recommendations on this one as well. Thank you.
Councillor Trapp.
I think I'm against the previous two speakers because I think it does affect the character of the land there. All the other hedges are made or fencing may be about the same height, but it is much more in keeping with that kind of quality of housing than this one, which I think is very well. It's in my eyes. I mean, it is. I do find it difficult to see because the others, to me, the other ones around it are much more in keeping with that kind of housing. So I think I will be approving what is taking up the officer's recommendation to refuse the planning application. Oops.
I will be siding with Councillors Hopper and Jones.
I'm undecided. I'm veering towards Councillor Trapp, but I'm also trying to apply some common sense and some pragmatism to this. You know, whilst I do appreciate everything that the officer said, I know it's a busy corner and it is a small garden, and there was all sorts of kiddies play equipment in there, so I can appreciate what the grandparents are trying to achieve. And that hedge, you know, if it had been a bigger garden, then I'd say stick with the hedge, but it's not a very big garden. And then, you know, it probably would, that big old hedge would have probably like shaded the light. So I'm really struggling with, you know, I don't like to go against the officers when I think they've got a very valid case, but again, this always brings home to me why it's really good for us to go and visit these sites, because what you think and what you actually see puts it all into sort of reality. So I'm still undecided. So I'm not going to support Councillor Trapp at this moment because I'm just so undecided.
If we ask these applicants to remove their fence and the concrete panels underneath and say move it a foot inside and then somehow scrape away and manage to plant some new fence hedging, which will undoubtedly die, then in actual fact we will have caused a right hoo-ha. It won't look any better, it will look worse. It will have cost the applicant a considerable amount of money, and what will we have achieved apart from having a repositioned fence perhaps a foot in from the current position? I can't imagine trying to establish, and perhaps Councillor Brown could advise me better, knowing about plants and things, but I think if I tried to plant a hedge in those circumstances, it would be a failure.
Have I got any more members' comments? If I haven't, we seem to have a balance. Councillor Trapp.
I mean, is it valid to think about what the use is for, rather than actually looking at the planning constraints on this? I mean, the fact that, we're saying, and we've had this before, Mr. Chairman, from you, is we should be looking at what is there, not saying, it's because it's safe for children or whatever it is actually whether it is for planning. So I think we should be ruling out any considerations of what it does to the household or who's using it. It should be actually on the basis of what we see before us and whether it conforms to planning.
As a person, as a member of the committee, I would agree with you, and I feel, but so far we haven't had any proposals. So
in my very amateur way, with permission.
Councillor Trapp did propose, I'm told.
Yes.
Oh, you did, you're proposing, are you?
I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse.
And I would second that. That's the only proposal we have so far. So
I'm prepared to put an opposing proposal. Or do you want that one to
we
go first?
will now go to a vote on Councillor Trapp's proposal, and depending on the outcome of that, then I've logged that you have made a proposal. So are those in favour of Councillor Trapp's proposal, which is seconded by me, to agree with the officer's recommendation and refuse the application for the reasons the officer says? And will those in favour of that please raise their hands? Okay, and will those against it please raise their hands? Okay, so
That was 4 votes in favour and 5 votes against.
so that is lost. So we have a proposal now from Councillor Huffer.
As you know, I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to need some guidance and some patience. I propose that we go against the officer's recommendation because I do not feel that the development has a detrimental impact on the area and character of, impact on the character of the area.
And who was going to second that? Councillor Jones. And you're happy with that wording? Okay. Yes, and delegate suitable conditions to the planning officer. So we're now going to go to the vote on that proposal from Councillor Huffer. So those in favour of Councillor Huffer's, please raise their hands. Will those who are in opposition to Councillor Huffer's proposal please raise their hands?
That one is passed with 5 votes in favour and 4 votes against, no abstentions.
Okay, so that the officer's recommendation has been rejected, and we don't need to have a proposal to, there's no more, that's the end of it, isn't it? Yeah. So, oh, well, Councillor Colsack's already gone. I don't think I've ever seen him. Now we move on to item number 7. And we can have the officer's presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for Councillor Stubbs. That's okay. Item 7,
is for the land rear to 3 Church Lane. The application seeks permission in principle for residential development of 1 detached dwelling. I'd like to note at this stage that permission in principle consent is an alternative route of obtaining planning permission, and a permission in principle can only consider very specific matters. There are 2 parts of this planning permission route. So the first stage is this stage, permission in principle, which establishes whether the use of the site is acceptable in principle. And then the second stage is called the technical detail stage. This is where detailed development of the proposal is submitted and assessed. So as I said, the application's at the first stage, and this application is only brought to planning committee as it's a departure from the development plan. So for some site context, the application is to the rear of number 3 Church Lane. It's outside of the development envelope that you can see on the slide with the black showing the development envelope. It's also adjacent to the conservation area. The site currently comprises an agricultural barn, which was historically used for the storage of fruits. And the north of the site is land south of Hinton Way, which benefits from recent approval for 30 dwellings. So the proposal is for a residential development of 1 detached dwelling. The scope of the permission in principle is limited to the location, the land use, and the amount of the development only. All other matters should be considered at technical detail stage. As the only thing we're here to consider today is the principle of the development, the proposal doesn't consist of anything other than establishing whether it's acceptable for the amount and the type of development proposed. So that being 1 dwelling of residential use. Although we access the site today from number 3 Church Lane, the indicative access is shown off of Clark's Lane, as you can see on the site plan here. But we can't consider access at this stage either. So on the top row of the photos, you can see some of the development going on at Hinton Way that we saw on site this morning, and also the redundant brick outbuilding. Just beyond this is an ongoing development for 4 residential dwellings. Then moving on to the bottom row, you can see the outbuilding that's on the site at the moment, on the left there, adjacent to the dwelling under construction at Hinton Way. And then finally is the application site looking back towards 3 Church Lane, so where we accessed the site from this morning. In terms of site history, as I said, so we walked through from number 3 Church Lane today, and there's a dwelling almost finished construction that we walked past. That was given consent in 2014. Then we have the 30 dwellings at land south of Hinton Way, which is accessed off of Clark's Lane. And then finally, the construction of the 4 dwellings that was seen just beyond the brick outbuilding in the previous photo. So the main considerations are the location. Is this an appropriate location for this development? Is the land use acceptable for residential development? And the amount of development, so is the proposal for 1 dwelling suitable? So the site is outside of the development envelope. As seen on the site visit earlier today, we saw the dwellings under construction nearby. The site is within a 10-minute walk of the village centre. It's in very close proximity. The site is by no means rural in terms of countryside location, given its bounds on 3 of its 4 boundaries by residential development. So although the site is outside of the framework, the situation on the ground is that the site will be increasingly enclosed by residential dwellings. Therefore, we considered that the site does not significantly contribute to the character or openness of the countryside. The location of the site is considered relatively sustainable for a single dwelling, given the amenities close by. For example, the primary school is just a 5-minute walk away. So whilst the proposal is contrary to Growth 2 as it's outside of the development envelope, the change in the character of the area through the provision of the recently approved housing development nearby amounts to a material consideration for us to consider in this application, which this justifies a decision at variance of the development plan and Growth 2. This is a very unique situation where the site is considered acceptable on locational terms. So as we've established through my recommendation that the location is acceptable, this ultimately leads to establishing that the residential use on this basis is also acceptable. Whilst it's not currently in residential use, it wouldn't be at odds with the surrounding context. So the suitability of the location of the site being acceptable also amounts to the residential use of the land also being acceptable. We've just highlighted here the Hinton Way, land south of Hinton Way, just to the north, and the application sites in the yellow circle there. So you can see the residential development surrounding the site. In terms of the amount of the development, our design guide indicates that plot sizes should be no less than 300 square meters, and this plot size amounts to approximately 530 square meters. We have been supplied with some indicative site plans that you can see on your screen here, just to show that one single dwelling could be accommodated. That is not to say that this location or size or scale would be what's submitted at a later date. It's just to show that there is sufficient space on the land for a dwelling and car parking. The surrounding plot sizes elsewhere are of a similar size. So the introduction of a dwelling on this plot size would also be considered acceptable. So therefore we've considered that the amount of development of one dwelling would be acceptable. I just want to raise, as I think I did note earlier on site, that there hadn't been any consultee comments, but we had one objection from, or we had two objections from consultees from other parties, one being a neighbour, which was number 4 Church Lane, so that's to the southwest of the site. But there were no comments received from parish or ward councillors. So the comments we've received from the neighbouring property were in relation to matters such as amenity, impact on conservation area and biodiversity. However, as I've said, we can't consider those matters at this stage. So although the application may be lacking in this detail, it would come forward at a later stage. It was also requested by the trees officer that an arboricultural impact assessment would be submitted. Again, as we saw on the previous slide with the indicative layout, we considered that one dwelling could be sufficiently accommodated on the site. So this detail was not requested at this stage, but in a future application, we would request this information if the application is accepted today. But at the moment, as we can't consider this specific location of the dwelling proposed and the scale, the information contained within a tree report may not be accurate of what actually comes forward at a later date. Then finally, just to note that the highways officer had no objections to the principle of the access of Clark's Lane. I just wanted to address this as we had received some comments. However, again, we're not considering matters of access at this stage. So in terms of the planning balance, applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The material considerations for this application relate to the residential development that surround the site, of which we hold significant weight to. So whilst the site does not form one of the exceptions to growth to and is in a countryside location, it's considered that the change in the character of the area through the introduction of recently approved residential developments amounts to a material consideration that justifies a decision at variance with the development plan. It's considered that the location, land use and amount of the development proposed is acceptable, and this could be sensitively accommodated on the site. We are recommending approval of the application. However, I'd also just like to note that it's not possible to attach conditions onto a permission in principle, so it'll be approval with no conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And in the absence of any speakers, we go now back to saying, have you got any further comments?
No comments, thank you.
Members, have you got any questions for the officer? Councillor Huffer.
Just terrified of going against the local plan. So what you're saying is that if we give approval for this, it's not going to open the floodgates for everybody to come rushing through and saying, I've got an infill, please, why can't I have this? Because that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, I have tried to justify in the report how it is such a unique location, particularly given how the Hinton Way development basically cuts it off. And then sort of just, if I can just point here, this site here is also with the four dwellings. So in terms of what we were looking, what Grove 2 looks to protect, being, you know, the openness of the countryside, actually it's not projecting into the countryside. So I appreciate what you're saying, and in any other location, in any other situation, perhaps we do look to protect our boundaries. But I think this would be sort of a struggle to argue that there would be significant harm to the countryside in this location.
Councillor Stubbs.
Hi, Chairman. Like Councillor Huffer, I have the same huge concerns. As you know, I can just see future meetings, people there holding this one up as an example, should it be approved today? So, you know, I've listened to what you said, so hopefully that will give us confidence moving forward, should it get approved. But I've got two questions. You said access and parking to be considered the next stage, technical stage. Would that also then be drainage as well? Because that's obviously a huge concern of residents of what's actually happening at the moment.
Yeah, so although we can't attach any conditions to permission in principle, we can to a technical details. So we can request that information at that stage.
So given that if it were to go to that next stage, so if the principal development is established here, does that mean at technical stage, i.e. whatever, outline, whatever, does that mean it can't be outrightly refused at that stage, or can it only be refused on certain things? So, you know, what I'm trying to get to is if we sort of, it was to be approved today, does that mean we're stuck with it and we just have to try and work with it? And
yeah, so we wouldn't be able to refuse it on principle because that's what we are establishing. So we're saying a dwelling could be accommodated here.
Right.
We have got things, like I said, such as trees, it's adjacent to conservation area, those sort of things. So you can refuse it on other matters, certainly at technical details. So amenity.
Right. So then, so say it gets this approved today, goes to technical details, gets refused on trees or whatever. So that could ultimately, that could stop it. Just say if that's what people were minded to do.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, if there's harm in other ways later, then we don't have to approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Given the great unknowns, would the technical details come back to planning committee?
We can request, I can, yeah, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, there is a provision within the constitution which would generally require follow-up applications on sites which have come to committee to be discussed with the chairman of planning committee as to whether or not they return to planning committee, which I would suggest is appropriate in this case. If members wanted to say categorically that any application technical details had to come back, we could note that at this stage. I would probably prefer not to do that and rely on the process that we've got in place in the constitution, but that's up to members.
Any more questions for Councillor Brown?
As we walked across a sort of grass seeded place. That's part of the old number 3, is it?
Yeah, I'll just try and pull up a plan. So yes, all of the land sort of to the south here, that wouldn't form part of this application.
But
so
would this cause a sort of example for that being developed as well? I mean, what's
just this land in between.
Yeah. Or is there a condition on that? Not.
I mean, I would have to check a previous consent. It would likely be that we only remove permitted development rights rather than any new dwelling. And I wouldn't be able to comment on the merits of any future application. I'll just get the development boundary again. Don't know if that's quite clear.
There was a considerable, almost the same size plot there as the one we're trying to approve now.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to prejudice any future decision that we may take.
Okay, members, so we've finished questions to the officer and now we go into general. Councillor Brown, where are you? I mean, are you on still questions to officer? Are you into debate? Okay, away you go.
Thank you, Chairman. Just like Councillor Hopper and Councillor Stubbs, when I first read this, I thought, oh, we're going outside the development envelope. So I had a fair idea what I was going to think about it. But this one really showed to me the value of a site visit because of where it is and how it's being accessed. And actually it would be, it really is an exception in my mind from our general rule of we always preserve the development envelopes. Because it's just otherwise it's just going to be a bit of wasteland.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I think I concur with Councillor Brown. I see no problem with this. I'm happy to propose it if somebody needs to get this on the road. I agree with the officer's recommendations. It is an acceptable site. I don't have any fears about what John's, Councillor Trapp's fears of development within that property, consider it's the only bit of garden that rather large house has got. So I think it would devalue it quite a bit if they was to build on it. So I'm quite happy to support this.
Any other points of Councillor Trapp? So we have an agreement with the officer's recommendation from Councillor Jones, second by Councillor Trapp. Right, all those in favour of that? So that has been approved. And that was unanimous. Yes, so that has been approved. And we move on to the planning performance. Of course you can, and thank you for your extensive contribution. So we're moving on to the final agenda item number 8. Has any officer got any additional comments you'd like to make? Some, please do.
I'm happy to just run you through the planning performance reports if you like, Chair. I think that's the next agenda item.
Well, I think if you could run through the item and point out any sort of highlights that you feel appropriate.
Absolutely happy to. Yes, I thank you. I don't think we've done planning performance reports for a while, so members have the updates in the agenda for June, July and August 2022. I won't go into the figures in too much detail, although obviously if members have got questions, happy to try to answer any of those. Members will see that generally speaking, officers are meeting or exceeding targets for determination of planning applications, and that the support team continues to significantly exceed its validation targets for applications. In terms of the numbers of applications received, June saw 153 received, which was a decrease from the preceding month and from the same time in 2021. July saw 150 applications submitted, so broadly the same as June, although that was about 20% down on the same time the year before. And then in August, we saw 172 applications received by the department, which is down on the same time last year, but represented quite a significant uptick from July this year. As far as appeals are concerned, we received 4 new appeals in June, 6 in July and 5 in August. One of those was the Bloor Homes application on Fordham Road, Isleham, which I think members will be aware of as it was considered by committee in April, I believe. We have also received 16 decisions across the 3 months, 12 of which appeal decisions, that is, 12 of which were dismissed by the inspectorate, so they went with the council, 4 of which were allowed. Members might be interested to note that 2 of those that were allowed relate to the High Flyer pub in Ely and the famous or infamous mug structure. While the inspector in that case allowed the appeal, he did require that the mug be removed from the pub after 2 years. So it was an interesting decision, that one. So that was given permission to stay for 2 years. And one of the allowed appeals relates to two dwellings at 14 the Avenue, Burwell, which members may remember, because that was a committee decision to refuse.
I was going to ask 14 the Avenue, Burwell, and could you refresh my mind about what it was?
I wasn't present at that committee, Chair, but it was two dwellings at 14 the Avenue. I may have the appeal decision if you want me to get into it. I think it was an officer recommendation. Councillor Brown's going to assist me.
Chair, there was two sort of applications on that site. The first one was for two dwellings, which committee reviewed.
I know it. Yeah.
Then it came back to committee for one dwelling, which committee approved. But in the interim, the applicant had appealed the two dwellings one and got there and won their appeal.
Oh, right. So he's got two houses there now. Okay, and Councillor Stubbs?
Dan, I don't know if you know about, I'm just going to ask a question about the Lazy Otter in Streatham. Yeah, so there's an enforcement appeal, and then there's also the application that was delegated. How can we find out whereabouts it is in the process?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stubbs. I was just going to come on to enforcement and was going to pick up the Lazy Otter because I thought it might be of interest. So that is the application for the change of use of the pub to a single dwelling, an enforcement notice. We refused permission earlier in the year and an enforcement notice was issued because the sort of new owner had started living in it, which was contrary to, well, it's breach of planning control because they haven't got permission to live in it as a single dwelling. So they've appealed both the planning refusal and the enforcement notice, and appeal statements are due end of this week. And so that's where we are in the process. We've got the appellant statement of case and we'll be submitting our response to that this week.
Okay, thank you.
You will keep members informed.
I can keep you informed, absolutely, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You have anything else?
No.
I was going to ask about where to my client appears decided that it's got pizza land. Am I right in assuming they to keep their coffee back there?
Yeah, I did just touch on that, Chair. Yes, that was the two at the High Flyer. The inspector took the view that they were harmful, but the purpose of an advert was to generate interest and be noticed. I'm paraphrasing, and so felt that it would be appropriate to allow them to remain for 2 years, after which it had to be removed. So that was those two. It was an advertisement consent and a planning application.
Oh, so that's right.
So there's a condition on that, on those permission, or as a condition on the planning permission that the mug has to be removed after 2 years.
2 years from when they first put it up, or
From the date of the appeal decision.
So they've nearly got another 2 years.
About another 2 years from now, yeah.
Can I just ask a question about the materials? Is it made of polystyrene, do you know, or is it made of something sturdier? Because it might deteriorate by then.
I believe it's made of a harder sort of,
Material.
but a plasticky material, yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, I think we've all done. Thank you very much for your attendance. Councillor Trapp.
Councillor Amber Smith did not totter down whatever that corner was, because she was on my arm.
I didn't know there'd been any scandalous comments made. I think we'll have the meeting finishing before we get to Councillor Trapp. They can remain as a private issue.